Hi everyone, and welcome to another installment of the Berklee Music Open House Series. My name is Doug, and I'm a student advisor here at Berklee Music. And today we're going to be talking about jingle writing with Peter Bell. And Peter is a producer, composer, and guitarist. His compositions and productions include May It Happen for You, the theme song to the award-winning film Radio Cape Cod, the themes to This Old House, New Yankee Workshop, Victory Garden, and the ABC After School Special, as well as countless jingles and production classes. Peter has produced tracks featuring many world-class musicians, including Bonnie Raitt, Livingston Taylor, the New Kids on the Block, and many more. His awards include 2 Emmys, 7 NEBA awards, 6 ASCAP awards. Peter's currently an instructor at the Center for Digital Imaging Arts at Boston University. He holds a Bachelor of Music in Jazz Composition and Arranging from Berklee, as well as a Bachelor of Arts in Government from Harvard. Peter, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's dive in. I talked a little bit about your background here, but if you could just go ahead and tell us a little bit more, perhaps what kind of path led you to becoming a jingle writer and commercial music composer and producer.
Well, as you mentioned, it's a little bit unorthodox in the sense that I started out studying government. And after I did that for a while, I immediately went on the road with a rock band. And we traveled all over the country. It was the James Montgomery Blues Band, and we were very popular here for a while. We sold out the Orpheum Theater twice in one night, and we could really pack the places around here. There was a really cool scene in Cambridge in those days, and you could go out any night and sit in with a bunch of different bands and have there was a lot of good music being played. And I started hanging out with Bonnie Raitt, and I played on her first album. And at any rate, we did the sort of almost famous deal where we made records and we had some exciting tours, but it kind of came to an end. And at that point, I decided I wanted to learn something about music because I was a professional musician for, I would say 8 years or so without knowing how to read music or anything about music theory. So I went to Berklee, and I loved it. And I majored in jazz composition and arranging. Not so much, I was never a jazz player, but I really wanted to learn music theory and learn how everything fit together. And that was a good way to do it. I liked the program a lot. And when I finished, I got a job teaching at Berklee, and did that for a while, and then I got married, and when I got married, I started the commercial music business. Coincidentally.
Got to pay the bills, right?
Right, that was it.
So how exactly, did you really kind of get started going about the jingle writing and producing that kind of music?
Well, this is kind of interesting, we started by doing these tracks. In those days, there were a lot of slideshows at corporate events, and we called them industrials. They were these really big productions where they would have, a wall with 50 screens that would take up a whole side of a gym or something, or an auditorium, and they would show this this series of slides and intone the history of the corporation, and they would want through composed music track to this, and so we would provide the music for those, and it would be 8 minutes of music, and you would spend 2 weeks doing it and get paid $500 or something like that. So we did that for a little while, and we weren't doing that well, getting this kind of work. And then went over to Hill Holiday, which is a big ad agency in Boston, and asked them if we could present our reel, or as you know, that's a demo. We played some music for them, walked into the room, there was like 2 guys in there, and we started playing our music, and one guy got up and said, "Who mixed this? The bass player?" and walked out. And it turned out that they had their playback system with the bass all the way up and the treble all the way down for some reason, you know. And when we fixed that, we played it for another couple people, you know, sort of moseyed through the room. And we went home thinking we're never going to hear from them again. And about 2 weeks later, I got a call that they were doing a competitive demo for a jingle for Baybank, which was a local bank in New England. And there was a studio competing in Nashville and in, I think, Muscle Shoals, of all places, and maybe one in New York. And they were going to include us in the competition. So we were pretty thrilled, and we went, you know, right at it. And in you know, maybe in a 2 days' time or so, we had our Baybank jingle blocked out, and I decided that the words that we were given, the copy that came from the copywriter, creative director, Doug Houston, really weren't probably the best thing for the Baybank Corporation, and I punched them up a little bit. You know, I changed a couple things here or there. So when we presented the demo, he said, you know, those words, we have to use the ones that I cleared with the client. You know, because that's his job, okay? So he's getting paid all kind of big bucks to create this copy, and it wasn't for the likes of me to change it. So it was a great lesson. You really can't mess with some of the specs that you're given.
So
But we won.
Well, there you go.
You know, so that's how we got our start.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of poses another question,
Yeah.
you know, mentioning that you have to kind of stick to the specs that the client gives. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the ways things differ, but how else does writing and producing and selling commercial music differ from other professional music careers?
It's a great question. I would say musically, it's writing a pop song, only shorter. And when you're scoring, it's the same as scoring a TV show or a film, but it's a very short form. And the artistic challenges are the same. The technical challenges are a little tougher. And when you write a pop song, you're going to write a hook, and you just have less time to deliver everything. And it's a very interesting challenge. Yeah.
So, for a commercial studio such as Music House, do they do anything aside from jingles? Any other kinds of music? Yeah, you do scoring for videos, for point of purchase sales, and for the kind of industrials that I was talking about. You're going to do library music. Most people do library music, which is a music library. What they used to call needle drop music is a company that archives and sells tracks non-exclusively. So that when somebody buys a library track, they syncs it to their video and puts it up on the web, they might hear the same music somewhere else. But the advantage is that it's very inexpensive to them. You know, radio and TV broadcast commercials, and then music for television. So, you know, as you said in your intro, I've done a bunch of themes for TV shows, and that usually will string out into doing scoring and other kind of maybe some promotion spots for those shows too. It's sort of like like an advertising campaign. Once you get into the campaign, you're going to get subsequent work from it, and that's a good thing. Absolutely. Now, does commercial music and jingle writing allow for a lot of collaboration, or is it something that, as a writer, you're kind of doing everything all by yourself?
Well, when you first start, you sort of have to do everything by yourself. But collaboration is the name of the game, and it's the most fun part of the gig. And as you know, because I know you've done some jingle singing, collaboration is a huge part of the creative process. I mean, I've done jingles with somebody like Patty Griffin, who's one of the best singer-songwriters of all time. You know, and back when she was starting out, she, you know, needed some jingle work, and we loved working with her. When she would sing a melody that I had created, she always made it exponentially better. And, you know, that happens every time you do one. And probably you've had the experience of working back and forth, making suggestions as a jingle singer. And the collaborative process always makes the product much better.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. The last one that I worked on, there was something that was just kind of off with the lyrics a little bit. Like it wasn't coming across the right way, and it was really interesting to sit down with the three people that represented the client and all the other musicians and just kind of brainstorm, like, how can we make this work and still deliver what they're trying to get across with the jingle.
Just what I mean. And if you're the jingle writer and the spec calls for, say that you're you, and the spec calls for a female vocalist, you pretty much have to collaborate, because even with auto-tune, you're not going to be able to pull that off.
This is true.
The other thing is it's great to involve people for whom whatever genre or style is being called for whom that genre or style is their main focus. And it always makes the product better to do that too.
So what would you say, I guess this one's going to be a little twofold, what would you say is the most important music skill that a jingle writer can have in their arsenal? And on the other side, from a business perspective, what's the most important business skill that one can have?
The most important business skill is to be able to listen and to be able to communicate, because your client is going to come to you, he's not a musician, he or she, and they might say to you, you know, I want it to sound like Santana. And that leads you into the musicianship issue, because at that point you need to be able to analyze Santana's style in a way that allows you to duplicate it, or, you know, at least get close to it. And that takes a lot of training. Musical training is really a huge asset. And I would say that the greatest talent that you could probably point a finger at for any kind of musician, but a jingle musician too, is to have a good ear. And that can be trained. But it's a matter of focusing on listening.
So it seems too that in recent years that there's been a lot of mainstream artists and pop musicians kind of licensing their songs to be used in commercials and jingles and things like that. I mean, how has that affected, you know, your business? Well,
that's a great question. It definitely has changed the business. There was sort of a cultural shift where, you know, respected artists began to allow their music to be used in broadcast advertising. The Rolling Stones, Stevie Wonder. I mean, you know, all the way back to the 60s, it's been people like Ray Charles, who's one of my personal all-time heroes. He would do jingles. And it just sort of opened up until they would use pop hits, and it was kind of a funny transition where, you know, instead of paying us $10,000 or $15,000 to do a jingle, they would license a Rolling Stones song for $250,000 for a campaign. But it sounds like a huge amount of money until you realize how much money is spent on advertising. The campaign, you know, they might make a 30-second TV spot. Shooting and editing that spot is probably going to cost $350,000. And then they're going to spend millions on the air buy, the broadcast campaign. And so it really is, you know, once you scale it, it's not as mind-boggling. But it definitely, you know, jingles are alive and well. You know, as you know from the creditreport.com ads with the indie band, that series is terrific. And there are lots of jingles that you hear new jingles on the air every day. But it definitely changed things. And So there was kind of more on the high side. Sometimes there was more on the low side where they would just license, if they were scoring an ad, they would just license a library track instead of buying an original score, which is, you know, which is a really terrific part of the business. I love scoring stuff. And then the middle ground, you know, there was less middle ground after they made that change, but it's still going.
So I think we'll do one more question, and then we'll
Okay.
open it up to some of you that have tuned in and are watching right now. So if you have some questions, you know, definitely get them in. When it comes to someone who's running their own jingle studio, I mean, how much time do you dedicate to writing versus producing versus selling versus running the actual business?
That's a great question. And when you start out, because you're usually starting out on your own, you kind of have to let circumstances dictate to you what you're going to do next. But you always have to do everything. If you're the entrepreneur or the person who's kind of running things, or it's your ultimate responsibility, you have to spend time doing each one of those things. Even if you don't write the jingle, you're going to supervise the process. You know, so there's no formula. But you know, you're not going to be able to just say, oh, you know, I'm going to spend 100% of my time doing music. You have to spend a lot of time doing the business too.
All right, so it looks like we've got a few questions coming in here right now.
Okay.
First one is actually pretty specific to your class.
Mm-hmm.
John Davis wants to know how much the new jingle writing class is going to focus on library music.
We do library music for about 2 weeks, and we talk about creating a library track. We start 1 week by the assignment is to create a 60-second track to certain specs, and then the next week we expand that into a whole package, and we talk a lot about where to go to market your library music, and we talk about crowdsourcing and licensing issues and how to make decisions about that kind of stuff. But it's a fun 2 weeks.
Charlie wants to know how you can work on having a better ear for things when it comes to jingle writing.
Well, there's 2 ways to work on your ear. One is a formal training kind of approach, and that definitely helps. You can do traditional ear training. You can go to school for it. You can get private lessons for it. You can find YouTube videos that will lead you through that. And I think that berkleemusic.com has an ear training course.
We do. We've got 2.
Well, that's obviously the best way to go, and it probably is awesome. But the other thing is really a matter of focus, where every time you listen to a piece of music, particularly one that's being broadcast, that you analyze it. Does the voiceover have reverb on it? Does the is the bass prominent? Is it highly compressed? Is the vocal mixed higher than anything else? Ask yourself all the questions that you can think of. Keep notes, and that's ear training. That's another way of doing it. It's not just the technical musical part.
Now, you touched on this a little bit before about how commercial songwriting can differ from other more, I guess, traditional forms, and this person wants to know how you can go about packing all the info about a product or a service into a 30-second segment. And how do you know what the most important info is to present?
Well, we do cover some of this stuff, because 2 of the weeks in the course are devoted to approaching local businesses And when you do that, instead of being a vendor to an ad agency, you're talking to a local entrepreneur. And in that case, you're acting as the ad agency yourself. You're your own creative director or copywriter. So you have to figure out exactly the answer to that question. And basically, you're going to research the business, find out who their target audience is, listen to whoever, the ads that they might be airing already, analyze what their selling points are. You want to make sure in your voiceover to give location or contact information. You should always include a call to action. Come and see us, call us, go to our website, give the address. And you want to, in the jingle itself, for the tagline that you're going to sell, use what we call the billboard information, which is either the name of the business or the name and the tagline. So in the case of Nike, for instance, all you would have to say is "just do it," because everybody knows that's Nike.
Now I think this is a really, really interesting question. What do you do when you disagree with a client?
Oh, brother. Well, I think a good client is going to want you to push back and to let them know when something's going to work and when something isn't going to work. If they give you some voiceover copy that's just too long to fit, you really have to say, look, this is going to sound stupid. We can speed it up, or we can edit it so that the phrases are on top of each other, but you really need to cut something. And usually, you're a partner with your client. They want that expertise. They want that feedback, and you develop the final product together. So your client is always right, but you may know more than he does or she does about a particular aspect of what you're trying to create. You're the musician.
Do you have are there any specific instances you might recall where you had to kind of deal with a difficult client?
Oh man, that's a good question. Yeah, I'm not thinking of a great story, but there are times when you get a client in there who is really very whimsical about their opinions, and you'll be scoring and you'll be sweating and working hard and using all your experience and your talent, such as it is, and they'll say, well, can you make the music go up when her hand goes up? And you just, or make it sound orange, yeah, you get some pretty strange situations. But for the most part, people are very creative in the ad business, and it's a great collaboration, teamwork.
So, do you protect your jingles or register them with like a performing rights organization or anything like that?
It's a good idea to do it now. I didn't in the old days, but ASCAP is moving towards a system called fingerprinting, where, and Doug Wood is on the board of directors of ASCAP. We have some really good interview with him in the course. And he's a commercial music producer. He actually owns and operates a very, very successful music library. So the fingerprinting system is actually going to take a digital fingerprint, and they will be able to, in an automated sense, keep a record or find every instance of your music being played on the air. Whereas in the old days, they would send a guy out, with a cup of coffee and a sandwich to sit in front of the TV and take notes. It's a new day, and that's going to really help.
This is an interesting question, more on the production side. Mm-hmm. They want to know if there's a particular DAW that you prefer to use when you're working, recording, and composing.
Well, I love Logic, and I use Logic, and I teach Logic at berkleemusic.com, but in the desktop music production course. But it really doesn't matter. Because formats are so easily converted in all DAWs now, you can work in any one of them. They all have strengths and weaknesses. Pro Tools has the largest installed base around the world. So if you're going to be working in a city in another city or you know, not in your own studio, you may have to get familiar with Pro Tools because that's what they might have there. But if you know, if you're starting out with a laptop and some software and a microphone and an audio interface, then I would say, you know, find the one that you like the best, but give Logic a try.
Now, this is kind of something that you mentioned a little earlier when you gave an instance of a client wanting something to sound like Santana,
right.
And working on your communication skills. How do you walk that line of, you know, not stepping on an artist? So, like, you're trying to make a track like Santana. How do you, you know, not completely rip off like Smooth with him and Rob Thomas or something like that?
That's a very good question, and we get into some detail about that in the course. Basically, I think that what you try to do is to emulate the atmosphere. You're copying a style, not a particular piece of music, and no one can copyright a title, no one can copyright a chord progression. There are some, you know, famous instances of plagiarism, and everybody knows about them. You know, when George Harrison got, you know, had to pay for My Sweet Lord being the same as He's So Fine by the Ronettes, it's sort of, you know, like some other things where you have to say to yourself, I know it when I hear it. There are some technical rules, but it's really whether a jury is going to say, you know, those two things are the same. And it's never going to get to a jury anyway. You know, someone might ask you to discontinue what you're doing. But, you know, you never want to go around and make slavish copies of things anyway, because that's, you know, that's not artistically satisfying.
So I think we have time for one more question, and this comes from Alec. He wants to know, are there any aspects of jingle writing that can be incorporated into film scoring?
I would, you know, I'm not sure how to interpret that, because, you know, a commercial music composer does both. And, you know, a lot of times you might not be writing a jingle with vocals to a spot, but you're always scoring spots. And there are a lot of the techniques and the aesthetic considerations are the same. When you're scoring a spot, just as though you were scoring a movie, you're basically telling the audience how to feel. You are usually trying to stay unobtrusive, unless the music becomes part of the message, a very important part of the message, like you know, the leitmotif in Jaws for the shark. And there are spots that are very much like that. So, you know, scoring a spot is a lot like scoring a movie. It's just really short.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have for the day. I want to thank you so much for being here,
Thanks,
Peter.
Doug.
This has been a lot of fun.
I enjoyed it.
If anyone out there has any questions about Peter's jingle writing class or any other class that we have to offer here at berkleemusic.com, all the advisors are more than willing to answer any questions at all. You can give any one of us a call at 1-866-BERKLEE. So give us a call. We'd be more than happy to talk with you. And again, thanks so much for being here, Peter.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.